In this video, I'll show you how to blend two images together. This is so fun to do, so let's get started. If you'd like to follow along with me, I've left a link to all of the photos that I'll be using in the video description. Blending two images together is really fun. There are quite a few steps, but if you follow along with me, you'll be able to make your images look like they really belong together. So let's get started with our first step, finding the right photos. If you ever hear someone say that you can combine any two photos together seamlessly, that's just not true. Every photo has different angles and lighting conditions, and in order to combine images together realistically, you need these conditions to match up well between your two photos. So first, let's talk about camera angle. Is the camera looking up at the subject, or looking down? Or is it straight on? This is really important because if the angles don't match, that's something that we can't really fix by editing it. When the perspective is off, it's very obvious, and I'll show you this in a moment. The other thing to look out for is the lighting. I like to categorize lighting into two groups, hard light and soft light. For hard light, look at the shadows. If you see harsh lines on the edges of the shadows, and the shadows are very dark compared to the highlights, then you have hard light. On the other hand, if you can't really see the edges of the shadows, and the light appears very even, then you have soft light. Personally, I think soft light is easier to work with because you can softly paint shadows where you need things to blend together. So I keep these two things in mind as I look for pictures: camera angle and lighting. So in this example, I chose this background image. The camera angle is relatively straight on. I can see that because the horizon is centered. And if I were taking this photo, I imagine I would be standing straight and normal, not crouching down to look up at the landscape, or standing really tall to look downward. I tried to put myself in the shoes of the photographer. And in this background image, I think the lighting is relatively soft. Where I see bright and dark areas, it all blends together pretty well. I don't really see harsh edges to the shadows. So, as I searched for my subject photo, I tried to keep those things in mind. So, for photos, you can take your own photos, or you can find free ones online. I like using Pexels, Unsplash, and Pixabay for free photos. So let's go ahead and go into Affinity Photo. I have the background image opened up, and I already found some photos that I like. So I'll just go to the top of the screen to File, Place. Then I'll select my subject photos, and I'll open them up. I'll just click to add these photos into our document. To choose which of these photos works best, I'm going to roughly cut these photos out to compare them. To do this, I'm going to use the Object Selection tool. And with each layer selected, I'll hover over the subject, and I'll click, and then I'll add a mask. I'll deselect with Command or Control D, and then we can move on to the next one. So I'll hover and click, add a mask, and deselect. Now I'm going to place each of these onto the rock in our image so that we can see what they look like. So let's start with this first one. So, with this first one, he definitely has soft lighting, which looks good for this picture, but he has sort of a different angle. I think we're looking up at this man because we can see the bottom of his shoes and the bottom of his chin. So, I think if I were taking this picture, I'd be standing below him, pointing my camera upward. Because of that, in the context of this background, you can see that it sort of looks like he's leaning backwards on this rock, falling away from the camera. It looks just a little bit off. So I don't think he is a very good fit for this photo. I think this one is a little bit more obvious that it's not a very good fit. For this one, we're looking down at this subject. I think if I were taking this picture, I'd be standing above her, pointing my camera downward, because I can see the top of her head and the top of her shoes. The illusion that I'm getting here is that she's leaning forward toward the camera, like she's about to fall forward. So this really doesn't look like it fits with the scene. Now we can go to our last one. I think this picture was taken pretty straight on. I can't see the top of her head or the bottom of her chin. It looks like I'm just looking at her straight, which fits very well with this background. So I think this is a really good fit. I also like the way her legs are curving over the rock. I think this fits really nicely for this background. So now that we've chosen the picture we're going to use, we can move on to step 2, masking the subject. To start, I'm just going to delete these other 2 layers so that we can focus on our subject. We already roughly cut out the subject using a mask, but I want to start fresh to make sure this looks really good. So I'll delete her mask layer, and then I'll grab the object selection tool, and I'll click on her again to make a better selection. Then I'll zoom in, and we can click Refine in the context toolbar so that we can paint over the edges of her hair. This just tells Affinity to take a second look at those areas to make sure they're selected nicely. Then I'll press Apply, and I'll add a mask. I'll deselect with Command or Control D, and now you can see we have a pretty good mask. But I think we could do a little cleanup to make this look better. So I'll grab the paintbrush, and with full flow and 0% hardness, I'm going to paint in black paint to remove any extra areas from our selection here. And if any areas are missing, I can quickly switch my paint color to white by pressing X on my keyboard. Then I can fill in any places that are missing. So I'm just going to continue to do this, painting in white and black paint all along the edges of our subject to make sure that everything's cleaned up nicely. All right, after all that painting, I think this looks really good. So with that finished, we can move on to step number 3, resizing and positioning. So this part can take a little bit of trial and error to get right. I don't really think there's an exact science here. Mostly, I'm just trying to get our image to look like it belongs. So for this, I think I'm going to make our subject a little bit smaller. And then I'll place her a little bit more forward like this. If you want, you can also rotate your subject a little bit. I think this looks pretty good. From this point on, our subject is going to stay wherever we've placed them, so make sure you like how this looks. Now it's time for step number 4, matching the global lighting. Basically, this means that I'm going to add adjustments to our subject's layer so that they match the background. So I'll go to our adjustments, and I'll apply a curves adjustment. So we have 3 different things that we could adjust here. We could make the midtones brighter or darker. We could make the highlights brighter or darker. And we could make the shadows brighter or darker. As I just moved these around, you could see that we were affecting everything, but I only want this to affect our subject. So I'll make this a child layer by dragging this on top of her layer. And now you can see this is only affecting our subject. To make our subject blend into the background better, I'm going to try to match our subject's lighting with the lighting that's right here on the rock. Right away, I can see that the dark black of her pants is a lot darker than the shadows we have on this rock. So I'm going to erase this to brighten up her shadows. I don't think I need to go very far with this. I just want to soften the black color so that it matches the black here. With that done, we can move on to the highlights. There aren't many highlights on the rock. It's a pretty dark area. And because of this, I can see that the bright areas on our subject are a little bit too bright in comparison. So I'm going to lower the highlight slider to dull down the highlights. To finish, we can adjust the midtones. For this, I like to just move this back and forth to see what looks better. In this case, I think I'll brighten the subject just a little bit, but feel free to do whatever looks best for your photo. With that finished, we can go ahead and see what this looked like before, and here's the after. This is a very subtle change, but I think this looks better, especially with the shadows. So now we can move on to step 5, where we'll match the global color. Just like with the lighting, I'm going to add adjustments to our subject's layer to match the background. And for this, I have 3 layers that I like to use to make the colors match better. This first trick is a little bit weird, but stick with me, it works really well. We're going to steal the colors from the background. To do this, select the background layer, and then duplicate it with Command or Control J. On this duplicate layer, go down to the filters, and then apply a Gaussian blur. Go ahead and increase the radius until all of the colors are nice and blurred. And make sure you check on Preserve Alpha so that the edges are blurred as well. Now with this duplicate copy here, I'm going to select the whole layer, and I'm going to make this a child layer to our subject. This only applies the layer to our subject's layer. And now I'm going to go up here, and I'm going to change the blend mode to color. So you can see this has applied the colors of the background onto our subject. And now we can just lower the opacity. And you can see what this looks like. Here is the before and after. It looks like she has more of the greens from the background reflecting on her. And I think this looks really good. This is a good start to our colors. The next layer I like to add is an HSL adjustment. Using this adjustment, we can make our subject's colors look more or less saturated. Right now, I think her colors look a little bit muted, so I'm just going to increase the saturation to give her more color. We can also shift the hue a little bit. If I shift it to the left, you can see this makes her more green, and if I shift it to the right, it makes her more red. Since there's so much green in this image, I'm going to lower it just a little bit to make her a little bit more green. To finish, I'm going to add one last adjustment, the color balance adjustment. Using the color balance adjustment, we can adjust the colors in the shadows, midtones, and highlights so that they match better to the background. Let's start with the shadows. I like to play around with these sliders until her shadows match the shadows in the background. So I'm going to start by adding some cyan. I think she needs a lot more blue to her shadows too. And maybe I'll add just a little bit of magenta. Then in the midtones, we can go ahead and play around here. I'm going to add some red and some yellow. And last, I'll adjust the highlights, adding just a little bit more warmth by adding some red and some yellow. These are subtle adjustments, but now you can see the before and after of that layer. And I'll hold Shift to select all of these color layers so that you can see the before and after of these colors. I think the subject is really blending into the background nicely, but do you know what would make this look even better? Adding a shadow. So that's step number 6, adding a shadow. Before we can add our shadow, we need to double check where the lighting is coming from. So where the subject is sitting compared to this bright valley below her, I think the rock looks very dark. That means our subject is sitting in the shadows. Because of that, the shadow that we add should be very soft and just underneath her where she's sitting. So let's begin by adding a new pixel layer, and I'm just going to place this layer underneath her so that it's sitting on top of the background layer, but it's not a child layer to her. Then I'm going to grab my paintbrush, and I'm going to paint in a lower flow in black paint to softly apply this underneath her. As I painted, I made sure to paint a little bit darker as I was closer to our subject, and then I made sure to fade it out around the edges. Here's the before and after. I may have painted a little bit too much, so I'll just lower the opacity to make this softer. To finish off this shadow, I'm going to add one more pixel layer, and this time I'm going to darken the contact point. So the contact point is just where her body is making contact to the rock, and I'm just going to make sure to really darken this area. Here is the before and after of darkening the contact point. So here is the complete before and after of the shadow. I'll just zoom out so you can see this better. I think this really grounds our subject and makes it look more realistic. We're getting really close to the end here. These last 2 steps are finishing touches to help make this look extra convincing. So step number 7 is adding shadows and highlights to the subject. So once again, we're going to be working in the child layers. So I'll select the top child layer, and then I'll add a curves adjustment on top of that. To start, I'm going to make this a darker curve. Then I'm going to invert this with Command or Control I. So you can see we have a black mask, which means it's not being applied to our subject. But if we paint in white paint, we can add this to our subject again. To add some darkness, I'm going to add more darkness to the back of her legs, close to the shadow. I'll also add this to the back of her foot here, the back of her arm, and I'll add a little bit more darkness to this whole side of her body. The reason I wanted to add darkness to those areas is because I want her to be more in the shadows on this side of her where we're seeing her. This is going to contrast nicely with our next adjustment, which is another curves adjustment, this time making the curve a lot brighter. I might even brighten the highlights a little. I'll invert this with Command or Control I. I'm going to add some beautiful highlights on the edges of our subject. I'm using these trees back here as a reference. You see how they have lighting just on the edges that's wrapping around them? I think this is coming from the valley below, reflecting light over here, and I want to mimic that effect on our subject by painting a light rim of light around her edges. So I'll paint this on her arm and her knee right here. I'll paint this on the top of her foot and the front of her pant leg here. I'll paint this on her face a little and around her hair. And now you can see the before and after of adding that light wrapping around her. I'll select both of these shadows and highlights layers so that you can see the before and after. Honestly, I think this looks so much better. By referencing the lighting in the background, I think she blends in so much better. The shadows make more sense, darkening her like that, and the highlights wrapping around her look really good. To finish this project, we're going to do step number 8, where we'll add some noise to finish things off. So this is a little trick I like to do to make things blend together. I like to add a little bit of graininess on top of everything. To do this, I'll close up our subject's layers and I'll select the whole layer. And then I'm going to go to our filters so that I can apply the Add Noise filter. This has been placed as a child layer, so I'm just going to drag this on top of everything. And then I'll zoom in here. As I raise the intensity, you can see that we're adding a little bit of this grit to everything. And I find when you do this on top of everything, it just makes the subject and background blend together better. I know it might be a little hard to see the difference after this video has been compressed and uploaded online, so I recommend you try this step for yourself so that you can really see the difference here. Here is the before and after, and I think this looks really nice. To finish, I'm just going to select a bunch of these layers so that you can see the before and after of blending our subject into the background. With that, you now know the 8 steps that you need to combine photos together. So fun, so cool. Great job. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next Affinity Revolution tutorial.